Trey Clayton's family filed a lawsuit against the school district, but they lost. The family eventually dropped the case. The current school superintendent in that district says corporal punishment is still used there, but that it's, quote, used very judiciously now. Jeffrey Brown has a closer look at all of this with Sarah Sparks of the Education Week team.
Sarah Sparks, welcome to you. I think a lot of people would be surprised at the continuing prevalence of this. And were you and your colleagues?
We were a little surprised at how many states are still using corporal punishment. We found 21 states and more than 4,000 schools were using physical discipline.
All different age levels, grade levels.
Absolutely. We found from kindergarten all the way up through high school, there were at least some students at every level.
Also surprising and notable in your stories were how much policies can and do vary state to state and even within states.
Right. In some districts, it was even school by school differences. There is no official training, not much guidance, and not a whole lot of accountability on how corporal punishment gets meted out.
What about law?
We have 29 states who have outlawed corporal punishment. 21 allow it to some degree or another. And from state to state, the policies and practices differ tremendously.
So define terms here. What do we mean by corporal punishment?
We use the federal government's definition, which is generally paddling, spanking, any physical discipline that is done to a child.
Did you find other kinds of punishment?
We did. The data set that we used doesn't differentiate by what implement gets used. We found everything from paddling with a 20-inch wooden paddle to some cases of chemical spray or even a taser.
And we should say the data comes from the federal government, right? Civil rights?
Right. This is the most recent civil rights data from the Education Department. It's for the 2013-14 school year.
You also found in the data a disproportionate cases involved African American children and lower income children.
Right. I was very surprised that Black students were twice as likely as white students to experience corporal punishment. If you're in a state that uses corporal punishment and you're low income, you are also significantly more likely to be in a school that uses it.
So in the case of a student like Trey Clayton, who we saw in the video, do you see that as a special case or as typical?
It's typical of the risks of using corporal punishment in schools. Trey Clayton said that his corporal punishment was a little more severe than he was used to, but Trey had been paddled many times in school before, and we just don't know what made him pass out in his case, that incident.
The arguments that you often heard in favor of this are that it's an alternative to suspension, for example.
Right. We heard from people who were very much against corporal punishment all the way to people who were defending corporal punishment, that this is something that can be used to get a kid disciplined quickly and bring them back to school. And it's used for everything from talking back in class to fighting in the halls. But the research shows that in the long term, it can have the exact opposite effect that educators think it will and hope it'll have. I mean, we have studies that find higher aggression rates, higher defiance of adults. There was even a recent neurological study that found students who had experienced corporal punishment several times over time had lower brain matter in the part of the brain associated with self-control. So there's some negative side effects to this.
And are people in places where they're doing this aware of that? Or what was their reaction when you pointed out the research?
For the most part, they weren't aware, but also had a sense of this is part of our community, this is something that we as educators grew up with, and the kids that we've paddled over the years have grown up to be good people. So I think there's a lot of community support in some of the areas that still heavily practice corporal punishment.
And let me ask you finally, what rights, if any, do parents have if they want to keep their children from being subjected to corporal punishment?
In some states, parents are allowed to opt their child out of corporal punishment, but that opt-out doesn't carry the force of law. And from what we've seen in the lawsuits that have been brought over the years, you don't stand a very good chance in court if you are a parent or a student who feels you were inappropriately corporally punished.
All right, Sarah Sparks of Education Week, thank you very much.
Thank you.